Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions about media and production 24/7. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always enter your questions by heading over to officehours.global or by using the QR code that'll pop up on your screen occasionally during the show. In our second hour today, we're going to do 2 full hours of Q&A. So if you don't know how the show operates, if you're relatively new here, your questions drive everything we do. So enter your questions. The panel will take a look at those. Your votes, if you're in the Mukana system, will determine what we get to and what we spend the most time on. And once those questions are in, we will discuss them at length, particularly the early ones. So vote early, vote often. Thanks for being here. And if you want to get into that system, just go back to officehours.global and you'll see some breadcrumbs that'll get you into the Mukana interface and kind of more information about how the show works. In our second hour, we're going to do a second hour of Q&A today. So we've got lots of room for your questions. Let's dive in. And what's our first question, Alexander?
Our first one's from Douglas Carmichael. It's interesting how the NAB 2024 camera return feed was a return from Zoom itself. Did any interviewees say anything about the latency?
Alex, did you hear anything?
The latency was effectively zero, so there wasn't any. You wouldn't feel anything more than if you were in a Zoom call. So I don't think anyone noticed it. There's definitely more latency in the live view because, of course, we were going in and out of the live view there. And the quality, and the range and a lot of other things. There's a lot of other advantages to the live view, but the advantage to the two-way system that we built with VisLink was that there was, I don't know exactly what the delay was, but it was like 10 milliseconds or less. It might have been, and so definitely less than a frame. And so that wasn't definitely something that someone noticed. I think what we were amazed by was how quickly people just kind of sunk into talking to someone on a screen. I mean, it was just really, I don't think we ever saw someone confused or trying to figure out what was happening. And that was one of the real important things. The screen seemed like it was a lot to do, but being able to see the panel made a huge difference. And I think that was, I think that made, that is what made that work. And I think it was just people just, they got very comfortable very quickly. And I really feel like we found a new mode of interview.
I'm going to emphasize that, having been one of the point people out there where we were talking to people, it was astonishing. As soon as you just told them, you're going to be on, you see this is just a Zoom call. You've done them all. Yeah. And everybody instantly settled down and just interacted. And I agree, there was almost no perceptible latency out there. There literally was not one pushback, whether the person I was interviewing or letting the panel interview.
There was pushback before. Really. We had people before they saw it. We were doing one of them, and the person came up to me and said, like, it was like a 2-part series, and the other person was talking, and he's like, I don't have enough time for this. Like, I can't spend another 30 minutes waiting to be on. Like, I have other people to talk to, and he was very resistant to it. And within a couple minutes, he was totally into it. Like, so as soon as that was the thing. It wasn't just that people weren't resistant once they started, but they were really dug into it and really got excited about it. And I think there's this whole interaction between, I think that the part of it is the panel is comfortably sitting there. You have more time to think because there's not one person. They were able to interact with them, ask them questions in a kind of a more stable environment. I think as we move into the future, there won't be the introduction that I started with. Like, hey, I'm here with Chad at Glide Gear. We'll give that up. Grant did such a good job of setting that up. I think that now really the next step is the camera will sit there. You'll see them. You'll hear the show coming, and then Grant will or I or whoever is the host will just throw it to hey, we hear you. Can you, and we'll, kind of set that up for that to work. And I just don't think we need the extra piece that we had added there. I think that added a layer that we didn't need. And so I think that's a fascinating, again, I found the whole thing to be relatively fascinating. It doesn't work for every conference. There's things that aren't very viewable, but I think that I was thinking about I was talking to someone last night. I really want to do this at the fancy food conference because it's so good. There's so much eye candy, and the fancy or concrete world or horticultural world or whatever, or the national. I was looking at the dates on the National Farm Show, like the National Farm Equipment Show. That would be fun. So anyway, the point is that there's on the conferences that do expos that do have a lot of things to look at. I think that this was a pretty big deal.
So it was fun. Let's go to the next question. Oh, Courtney wants to get another. Excuse me, Courtney.
I was just going to say, as a panelist, I was really surprised. The first couple of interviews we did, we had the speaker open, and I could hear a little bit of an echo, but because I guess the pathways, we kind of defeated Zoom's echo cancellation by the pathways that we were taking through our own equipment. So I was amazed at how low the latency was when we could hear a little bit of echo, and I couldn't figure out how to eliminate the echo from the return. But so, yeah, I don't think it affected the interaction at all. I think everyone just thought it was like, we were just standing there.
And we'd like to have the speaker work. I think that it was one of those things that we were still playing with. The speaker wasn't quite loud enough. It worked perfectly in the lab. This gets into, this is what happens when you drill. So it worked perfectly in the lab. But once we got into the space, it was just the ambient sound was so much higher than it was. What sounded really loud in the lab just wasn't keeping up with that. So what's nice about the speaker is we can just walk over and start talking to someone. But the IFB stuff worked really well. We were using the IFB Blues from Electrosonic, and those worked well, just handing them off to somebody. We'll use better earpieces. I thought I had enough audio implements for the show, and I'm missing all the earpieces for my audio implements. I have all the cables. So they were all wrapped, and I looked over and I go, I got 4 of those. That'll be fine. I pulled them out. I must have sent somebody all the top pieces, the little
boil them. Yeah, to clean
the coil. I must have sent them to somebody because none of them were there. So what I thought was there, and so we didn't have enough time. So what I did quickly is ordered some disposable ones, so we just hand people new ones, and that worked fine. But again, we'll use audio implements in the future. I'll get a bunch of little Christmas trees, and it'll look better and be a little bit better set up. But overall, I thought that again, this is something that had been something we played with a little bit years ago, and really thought that this might work, and it was astounding. Like it was really an exponential jump in the quality of the interviews.
Moving on to the next question.
Simon Ray in Midlands, UK asks, is anyone aware of good online videos showing the impact of changing the focal length and distance on a shot of a person's face? I'd like to show it to someone who looks unnaturally slim in self-shot videos compared to their show recordings.
Sure. Courtney, do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, I want you to send me that lens that makes you look unnaturally slim, because I've been looking for that to make my face look a little less wide. But seriously, I did find Edmund Optics has a good thing on their website on understanding focal length and field of view, which has to do with how things look different in a wider angle lens when you're close to them. And they do have little explanations of field of view and the optics involved. And there is a video way down here at the bottom that you can take a look at that they talks about working distance and focal length basis. So that's basically where I think you'd get into that information about how things look, and depending upon the wideness of the lens and the distance from the lens. So take a look at that at Edmund Optics. I think it's Edmund Optics, just to search for Edmund Optics. And you can take a look at them there. It is quite a difference. There are most of these YouTubers who are out there with the super wide angle GoPro on the end of a selfie stick, when they get in the studio, they look a lot different when they're on an 85 millimeter lens, being photographed from somebody across the room. I was surprised one time when I was a child. I went to the TV studio on a little tour, and I'd been watching the nightly news from that TV studio all the time with the weatherman who went up and used to write on the piece of glass and draw the weather. We got there and we watched the news show from in the studio, and I couldn't believe how fat the weatherman was in reality. And so I talked to the engineer there, and I said, God, he looks a lot different here than he does on TV. And he goes, don't tell anybody, but we put a 10% stretch on the vertical for this guy. And they were actually stretching the video up 10% to make him look a lot thinner on TV. So that was my first experience with how things seen on TV aren't as they actually appear.
Absolutely. And if you look on the web, you'll find all sorts of things like these that show you different lens configurations and just give you a static image of what the lens and distance ratios due to faces, it's pretty dramatic. You look at the beginning and the end, extreme wide angle, and then an extreme telephoto backed off and zoomed into exactly the same framing, and it's pretty stark. So something to think about. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Paul Walhus in Hot Springs this time. Magewell has a new mini director switcher. The touchscreen accepts 2 inputs, 2 USB inputs, NDI, and can be remotely controlled by mobile devices. Comment.
And Jeffrey Powers is going to help us out. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I actually got to see that at NAB. I do have a video coming out in the next week about that. But basically, it's a pretty decent little box. As Paul mentioned, it does a lot of remote control, which is really cool. So you don't need to touch the box at all. You can call up the iOS app or the Android app and be able to switch between the camera shots. You can do a picture-in-picture shot in that. You can do a scoreboard. You can get some basic graphics in there. And you can have somebody on their phone handling the graphics. Like, let's say it's a scoreboard. So one person's handling the graphics, bringing them in and out. Another person on another phone that's actually changing the points for each team, another person that's actually changing the shots, and it's all going into this one device that nobody's touching. So this is the next evolution to the mobile type switcher, and I'm pretty excited about it. I can't wait to get one in studio to test it out. But a lot of great features there. It's going to be perfect for anybody that's doing a two to three camera system, and you can definitely send it out. You can send it out to YouTube. You can record. One of the USBs will be used for recording, so you lose a camera off of that. But I wouldn't do too much USB recording in those situations anyway. I would be able to hook up my PTZ cameras into the HDMI and then on a port through USB to do VSCA control, and I'd be good to go.
Courtney wanted to get that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jeffrey, because I'm looking on their website and I didn't see any pricing information. Did they give you an estimate price on this thing?
They did. Do I remember what it is? I think $1,000, but do not quote me on that. He did say it in the video. I can check that out and let you know a little bit later.
And for those of you, sorry, and I was just going to say, and for those of you who haven't gone to that website, this is a touchscreen device, kind of like a little monitor that has inputs on the side. It's not like an ATEM Mini or anything. That's
Alexander.
Yeah, I was just looking up BH Photo and Video. So they have a couple bundles. The base one's $12.99, and they have a more expensive model, which has a hardware controller for $20.43 US.
There you go. There's some prices and items. Paul, hope that helps. Let's go on to our next question.
Next one's from Werner Pure in Zurich. I recently purchased a Glide Gear TMP 100 teleprompter for calls and streams. Not loving the iPad as a monitor. Any recommendations for a good, affordable teleprompter monitor with HDMI in and out and the ability to flip the output would be great.
And Jeffrey Powers raised first. Jeffrey?
So iPads, I'm not a big fan of using an iPad as a teleprompter. However, iPads can be altered so you can use them via computer. I use a program called Duet, and then the other program's escaping me right now. But basically, what the other program does is what flips the monitor for me to read through the iPad. It's actually, I can do an iPad. I can actually do a Kindle Fire if I wanted to on that. But I definitely want to have a monitor that connects up to the computer somehow. Right now, I'm looking at you through a small teleprompter, something I got through Amazon that's meant for iPhones, and I took off the iPhone part and I put a Feel World 5-inch monitor underneath, so I can see myself pointing to you guys as we're going, and be able to keep that close to constant eye contact through that. If you want something bigger, you can always try a portable monitor too. Portable monitors kind of reach past the teleprompter size, but in most cases, like a Zoom call, you don't see anything on the sides here. It's just what's in the middle, and that's usually the person's face, and that's what you're looking for in those situations.
Courtney?
Yeah, I bought one of those Glide Gears when they were on sale at Fry's, when Fry's was going out of business for like under $100. And it's not very flexible in its mounting kick. It was designed for a phone or an iPad, And so it has these metal things that hold a monitor that are wedge shaped like this. So it's going to be hard to mount another, something that's not as thin as an iPad, like a 7-inch monitor in there. And the other thing is the distance. The monitor and the glass are fixed in distance. And when I tried to put another monitor in there, it cut off a lot of the reflected image because you couldn't change the distance between the glass and the monitor at all. And so there are other monitors. I found this one. I can't remember the names of the ones that I use. I have an 8-inch monitor that I tried on mine. There's this 70 one from Beatronics that's supposedly works well. It has HDMI, VGA, BNC. I think it has the same controllers as the ones that I use, whose name I can't remember right now. But they might work for you. But like I say, you're gonna have a little trouble fitting it into that particular hardware mount.
Yeah, I think everybody who has gone down this road kind of realizes the more you spend, the more advantages you get. I'm using a little teleprompter rig that has a Lilliput monitor. It's one of the ones that does that hardware image flip for teleprompting inside the monitor itself, which makes it easier than having to do that outside on the iPad or iPhone or something. I do carry a small one with me on a lot of commercial shoots for clients that just get kind of lost and they don't know how to talk, so you put some teleprompter copy up for them, and at least they get some success at the beginning of the shoot. I try to get them off of that if they're not a skilled teleprompter reader, because it does make people sound a little more wooden often if you're not really good at that skill. Jeffrey, you had another thought?
Just remember the name of the program is called Better Display. That's what's going to flip the monitor for you, and that's for Mac only. So Duet to go into the iPad, because you can also go wirelessly, and then Better Display will make the proper flips so you can see it the right way, especially if you're going to be reading anything off of that teleprompter.
Werner, I hope that helps. Let's move on to our next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida asks, do you think that we will see a version of Wirecast running in the cloud soon?
Jeffrey, what do you think?
So at NAB, that was one of my goals, was to find out where Wirecast is going. You have this one standalone piece of software inside a company that's trying to deal with enterprise broadcast companies, and so there's a lot of questions as to where it was going. They changed their models. They got rid of their customer support, certain customer support for the people that were using it on just a regular basis. And they're basically the answer that they came out back with was there is a lot of things that they can do to make Wirecast more of an enterprise-centric system, and within the next year they're going to start making some changes to reflect that, to work with the other software. It doesn't mean that the regular everyday user is going to lose the ability to use Wirecast. It's just that you're going to see a lot more stuff. So companies like CNN or any company that uses a Telestream will be able to use Wirecast in their system and feel a little bit more comfortable, is what I got from what he said there. So being able to run in the cloud is not impossible. It's on their roadmap, is my guess. And so I think there will be a cloud offering shortly. They do a little bit of cloud stuff, and they do have their rendezvous and things like that. But yeah, I just keep an eye on the next year.
Next question.
Next one's from Douglas Carmichael. When you've got lots of feeds going to and from lots of places like NAB 2024, how do you keep audio and video in sync in the absence of Matchbox or similar device? Were any other solutions used?
Best person to answer this is Alex. Alex.
And I don't know if we hit it 100%. So it's a complex thing. I think we did as well as a lot of Zoom calls do, or any kind of WebRTC calls. But I think that, we need more time. And so what you have to do is really figure out an overall delay that is the minimum delay. Everything's going to be delayed by this much. And then you need to delay the inputs individually to adjust for that. And again, we, in a fast moving paced process, I don't know if we nailed that 100%. But that's what you have to do is to kind of individualize those pieces. And I think that, as we move forward, you'll see it get tighter and tighter.
Next question.
Next question's from Paul Walhus in Hot Springs. What does it take to launch a dedicated TV app that would appear on your living room TV? What is the submission and screen process for these types of apps?
Ooh, big question. Jeffrey, start us off.
It really depends on which platform you're going to go through, whether it's Roku, whether it's Apple TV, or another device. In all reality, you could have a web page running and then Chromecast it to a TV. So that's always a possibility. Roku's changed. I remember it was super easy because you just you create your JSON file and then you'd set it up for your Roku, for your Boxy at the time, and be able to get it up and running. But since then, they've put in a little bit more screws to the system because they didn't want just anybody going and putting up their channel and find out that it's something that they don't want on their system. So there's a little bit more process to it nowadays. And of course, Apple TV is the biggest process of them all to get an app onto their box because there's a lot of security and a lot of more hoops to jump through. But the end result is a better app in all. For Roku, like I said, they just revamped their system for you to get an app up there. So a lot of creators kind of dropped their app because, like I said, it wasn't as easy to do, just a simple JSON file. So you'll have to really go through what each program, each over-the-top television device, like Amazon Fire, like Roku, like Apple TV, are doing for requirements.
Alex.
Yeah, if you want to build your own app, so the basic requirements for Apple TV, I don't know the other ones as well, but you need to build an app that, of course, fulfills the basic, it shows up, it does what it needs to do. It also has to have content that is available freely when someone downloads the app. So if they get the app, it has to be able to do something immediately. Those are really the only requirements. Even if you only have one piece of content, you can usually get a Apple TV app. I've done it. So it's not that big of a deal to get those up. And it's roughly the same for a lot of the Google Play solutions as well. The real thing is how do you deliver it? What's going to manage all that content, so on and so forth. And Vimeo really has the best over the top app structure out there. If you're not going to build an app costs money. You're talking between $50,000 and $150,000 for development to build it, to build the back end, to build all those other things. Vimeo will set it up. I think it's about $8,000 to $10,000 a platform. It might be a little bit more, or a little less nowadays, but the last time I talked to them, it was $8,000 to $10,000 per platform. So they have a pre-built way to build those apps, and they are approved by the groups, and those apps can support VOD, live as well. And so they've really kind of centered that. They've really gotten themselves around that. Now, it will cost you per subscriber if you start using their subscription services. There's a lot of other things that they tack on to that, but they're the most efficient, and that's what corporations who really want that VOD have kind of leaned into that, unless they're ready to build their own app from scratch, which again is costly. It just takes time. It takes time to build one from scratch, and so that's why Vimeo's kind of cornered that easy to deploy market.
Courtney.
Yeah, Alex just had all the good information on all the legitimate and the best ways to submit an app for a commercial type player that's going to exist on the different over-the-top streaming services. There is another way. If you develop for Android, you can sideload onto a few platforms like Fire TV and Android TV and Google TV. My world's famous SmartTube Next, which is what I use for YouTube, is a sideload app that is open source and allows you to play all of your YouTube videos without, and it skips over ads, and it doesn't insert the ads, and it has no ads. And it's free, but you do have to sideload it. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, but I do have it on all my streaming Fire Sticks and streaming Google TVs and anything that uses that interface. You have to jump through a few hoops to get it loaded and download it through something called Downloader and then install the APK. but it does work. It's quite handy and allows you to do that stuff. Things may be changing because of the lawsuits in the EU over Apple. May be changing to allow side loading. They haven't kind of hammered that out yet, so stay tuned. You may be able to side load stuff onto Apple TV soon. Who knows?
Alex, you want to get back in?
Yeah, and the other question you have to have is why? Why would you do it? Like, the thing is that, I mean, no, I don't mean the side loading thing. I mean, Courtney knows why he does it, but he's probably 0.001% of Android users that will actually do a side load. And if the EU makes side loading available on the iPhone, it'll probably be about the same. So it'll be like some small, tiny percentage of people that do it. So if you're deploying that app, you have to ask yourself, am I going to get any viewers? The other thing is that what do you get out of an app? You have to really decide what that is, because right now the best platform for you to put content on is YouTube. And so so if you put it on YouTube, you're not just benefiting from the fact that their infrastructure is probably the best in the world, but it's also that there's people that can find you that wouldn't know about you otherwise. You build an app and you have to do all the work yourself. If you're doing YouTube, their recommendation engine is working for you. And so as you start to build those out, so you might decide you want to do something like that, but most YouTubers who decided they wanted to go build their own app have failed. So it has been, and this is after they already had a big following. It has been it is. So if you're not already big and you're trying to build your own app, you got to be a corporation that wants to have some kind of weird control or subscription services that only you have, or there's a lot of reasons to do that. I mean, there are good reasons to do your own app, but as a content creator, right now, the gold standard is YouTube, and I would be that's what we're streaming to, and that's what we put content on, because it's reliable. It's got a huge management system. You're getting tons of data back about what's working and not working, and it just works. And it can be, and you can watch it on an 85-inch screen TV. You can even deliver 4K live HDR, which is what we're going to be doing in a month. There's all kinds of possibilities of what's possible with YouTube, and so I don't think that. I just think that it's an interesting intellectual thing to think about. What would it take to put an app together? But from a business perspective, you really have to decide whether that's viable.
Jeffrey, you want to get back in for a minute?
Yeah, the last thing from what Alex said about YouTube, and last time I knew, you cannot create an app and then throw your YouTube on it. You have to have a CDN, your video's on a CDN, like a Vimeo or something like that, to go in. And once again, it's going to create a file, so it will catalog the whole thing. And
I just want to outline, if you're successful and you have your own app and your own CDN, you're going to go broke. Like unless you have a lot of money, it costs a lot of money to move data. Like when you see I can tell you the numbers. Like when you see let's just say you see someone with Mr. Beast down, the 20-minute video that's downloaded 50 million times on your own, that would cost millions. That one video would cost you millions of dollars to distribute. Like you would get a check, for an HD stream or a 4K stream being downloaded 50 million times, you're talking about millions of dollars that you would pay if you were doing it with your own CDN, even with AWS, and so you just also think about the cost of that process.
And if you have questions today, don't forget we have 2 full hours of Q&A, which means that your questions are always important, and your votes to make sure that we get to the ones that are most important quickly. So just a quick mention, and now we're going on to our next question.
We have a QR code question from Jeff Westman in Oakland, California. It looks like he's posted a follow-up. I have to sub out a 75-person live event capture being live streamed via Zoom, 2 cameras, 2 wireless mics, ATEM mini, and a PA. I've never had to sub a job out. How best to structure this to serve a longtime client without losing or without a total loss of income?
A big topic. Alex, you want to take off?
I would say the primary thing you should focus on, and I think there's a second. Well, why don't we ask the second question as well, because they're both kind of clumped together here. Just go ahead.
There you go, Alex.
Yeah, the next one is follow-up info. I'll be out of the country. My equipment would have to be stored somewhere for weeks. Using a contractor's equipment, would you add a fee to their fee, a percentage? What's the standard?
Yeah, so you can. The main thing is that you really have to find someone you trust, and the primary goal that you should have is maintaining your relationship with your client. So first of all, you're going to outsource it to someone you trust. You don't want them to end run you, so they're going to come in, you can hand this off to somebody and then now the client is their client. So you have to have someone that you trust. In the production world that I live in, you don't do that. Like, you don't, like, once you get hired, if you're subbing for someone, you don't take their client. That's a good way for no one to want to work with you. But you don't know that. There's a lot of people that don't have that belief system, and they may take your client for you. So that's the danger. You have to have someone that you really, really trust, and you have to trust that they can do it, and that they'll give you the client back. Because you can have people that you trust that can't actually do the program, and if a client has a bad experience, then that's the end of that as well. So it's a really tricky problem to have here, and you really want to work with someone that is, that you think is going to be upstanding, that can manage it. As far as adding a fee goes, generally your client's going to expect to pay what they pay. Like, if you tell them, oh, I can't be there, so I'm hiring someone else, so it's going to cost you more, well, that's the end of your relationship with your client too. So your job is to figure out how to do it inside of the budget that you normally would do it for the client. I wouldn't be marking it up. I might try to bid it out to someone who will do it for a little less, so I have a little bit of edge. But I've done shows where I lost money to hang on to the client. Like I ended up paying an external resource more than I got paid so that I could make sure that the client was taken care of, because that's what I worry about is the next 10 jobs, not the job this one job that's sitting there. So I wouldn't worry as much about that. What I think the tricky part for you is to find A, someone that can get it done effectively, and B, someone who someone who's effective, but not so effective that they take your client from you. So that's the tricky part. And it's a constant, issue. Some people build groups of people that will work together to maintain these flows, but those are the things you have to worry about. Good luck. You're in a tricky position, and that's the hardest part of not having a larger company and that can absorb more shows.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, and I would start thinking about if this client is very important to the point where you make lots of money off of them, instead of subbing it out, trying to find an employee that would work in that country and get equipment that would live in that country. And
I think he's out of the country. The stuff is here. Like he'll be out of
he's leaving. Okay.
Yeah.
So if the equipment's here. Yeah, if the equipment's here, then get another instead of saying sub, get an employee, and have them wear the shirt and have them look the part as he's part of your company, not as something that of his company or her company.
Interestingly enough, one of the most seminal moments in my career was when I understood for the first time that I wasn't getting paid for doing work. I was getting paid for taking responsibility for results. So in your last part of the question, would you add a fee to their fee or whatever? The question is, if you're shouldering responsibility for getting things done, then you deserve to be compensated for shouldering that responsibility. Whoever you're bringing in to do things, it's not on them. Well, it is on them, but it's mostly on you. That's the point of being the producer, the middleman, somebody who's profiting from the efforts of others, which a CEO once defined to me as leadership. I mean, that is what it is. It is taking responsibility for the work of others and being the person in the center who can sink or swim, profit or loss based on the success of the event.
And it would be something that you wouldn't hand off to them as much as you would be in all those meetings and all those relationships and making sure you're handing it off and making sure it's clear that you're having that relationship. But it's also welcome to why most of us who do production don't take vacations.
Absolutely.
We don't like it's one of those things that we're always ready to I've canceled a lot of vacations because or sidestepped them or shortened them because we had a project and the client project was important enough that it didn't make sense for me to do that. And so that's kind of a pretty common problem with production.
Yeah. For me, the answer was, I can do the work. Can I shoulder the responsibility? That's the big question because that's the risk. Next question.
Marielle Shusha, Miera and Woblo ask, why is the dialogue so low relative to music and Fox when watching on a smart TV on built-in speakers, so we have to keep riding the volume? Is it just bad mixing by someone thinking mixing with max dynamics is being an artist?
Oh, good. Another big question. Alex, start us off.
There's a new style. There's a new style of mixing that really believes that the environment should be part of that the dialogue should be part of it and it shouldn't stick out. If you look at old films, obviously they wanted to make sure that you could hear the dialogue, and so they pushed it way forward. And there's a new belief that that should be part of it. And I think Christopher Nolan's probably one of the leaders in that belief of pushing the dialogue into the experience. It has been, as I've really talked to a lot of people about it, it has a devastating effect on theater going. My family will not. My wife and daughter, my son and I will go, but my wife and daughter have no interest in going to the theater anymore because they don't have captions. Like, they don't understand what's going on. Like, they don't, like, for whatever reason, they're like, I'd rather watch, like, to them, and I admit, Tenet is an entirely different movie when you read the captions than it is when you watch the movie. If you watch the movie without the captions, you really aren't getting what's happening. And Christopher Nolan will say that that's his intention, is like it's part of the soundscape and the feel and everything else. But a growing number of people are unwilling to watch content without captions because of this style. And it is devastating theaters. Like, it is really not very unhealthy for the theater goers, because captions now come on automatically for most of our services. People have gotten used to them, and it has come up not only in my family, but other people that I've talked to said, "Oh, if I go, I won't understand it until it comes out and I can watch it at home." And it's just I think that it's a really big mistake that they're making doing this, and I think that it's part of an overall malaise that is happening in the theater industry. That there's a bunch of factors. It's not one factor, but there's a bunch of factors that are having a huge downward pressure on theater going, and this is one of them.
Courtney?
Well, I have a different point of view. I do think Alex is right. They're definitely trying to, Christopher Nolan is famous for this, mixing his dialogue low. And relating back to your original question, I'll get to that in a second about the TV speakers themselves. I was just going to say, this is my no captions rant. I hate people that have the captions on and everything, because those people, while they may have been able to follow the plot because they could hear the dialogue by reading understand the dialogue by reading the captions, they didn't see the movie. They were reading the movie. They might as well have read the book. I hate captions because they're distracting.
Like,
distracting.
I agree with all of that. I'm just saying that the problem comes back to, you got to put the vocals back up.
Right.
you got to move the dialogue back up.
And one of the problems is with TV, if you have a TV with built-in speakers, TVs have gotten skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And so what they've done is the bezels have gotten smaller, so there's no place to put speakers. So they put the speakers on the back of the TV, and they reflect off the wall. If you don't have a reflective wall, you're probably not going to hear very much of the sound at all. Plus, it changes the frequency response of the sound that you're hearing. And there's usually only two speakers in that TV. And so if you're watching a movie that's in 5.1, and what TVs now try and do is simulate the phantom center speaker and the surround speakers with psychoacoustic tuning of their audio channels. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work. It depends on how reflective your surroundings are, whether it works or not. And sometimes the dialogue gets lost. The other thing is, make sure that your TV handles the sound mode that is being delivered by your streaming service. If your streaming service or your streaming box is set to 5.1 and you've just got a stereo pair, set it to 2-channel stereo or 2.1 if you've got a sound bar, but you said you've got the internal speakers. And the solution to this is get a sound bar, get an external sound system. Most TV manufacturers expect you to buy a sound bar to go along with their big TVs, because they don't put a lot of engineering into the sound system of the internal speakers, because they know most people will have them turned off and be using some type of a sound bar for minimum and maybe an AVR system for doing 5.1 or Atmos sound in their viewing theater. There is one other thing I wanted to say. There are modes these days on the sound bars that emphasize dialogue. It says that they have different names for it. but it'll automatically increase and put a little bump in the frequency response of the area of dialogue, and bump up the center channel a little bit more to solve the Christopher Nolan problem.
Alexander.
Yeah, I agree with a lot with what everybody said. I mean, it's obviously a problem if that many people have to have captions. I think it's not just the way we're mixing now. I think also it's a combination of these poor speakers. You know, it used to be, I remember growing up, everybody, you know, even inexpensive, you know, $500-$600 little bookshelf speakers were better than anything that was built into a TV. And I remember I'd go over to friends' houses and everybody had a pair of small speakers. And now that we've kind of gone backwards now with these built-in speakers, so the audio quality of the speakers have gotten worse as well. And you know, and I watch a lot of old movies, and I do have to say, you know, when you watch old movies from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, these mono mixes were just crystal clear. I mean, the dialogue and everything, you could hear every single word. It also helps when actors enunciate. That's another problem too. I just find a lot of actors now, their diction is not as good as it used to be. So it's a combination of a bunch of things there.
Courtney.
Yeah, and when it comes to old movies, here's someone who's been working in the sound business since optical soundtracks. And back then, there was something called the Academy filter. If you're wondering why old movies the dialogue is so clear, it's because the primary film sound output was often optical track, not magnetic, and it didn't have full frequency response. And everything was run through an Academy filter, even though you were recording at full frequency response on magnetic recording tape. At some point, the output generally was output over optical. So you had a filter you pressed in the mixing stage called Academy filter. You popped that in, and it caused you to boost all the frequencies in the monitor speakers in the middle. So your dialogue was clear. So you mixed it. So in the final mix, you're mixing to bring those center frequencies up. And that's why it was so clear. The dialogue was always so clear in those older movies because of the frequency curve that was added to them to compensate for that optical soundtrack.
The other thing for me is just that everybody has a different listening environment. Some of those are very good for audio, and some of them are very bad. I've listened to something in a very cushy, plush thing that really sucks up all the high frequencies, and it's hard to get the clarity of dialogue. I find myself watching more and more content to really enjoy on AirPods or something else where the sound is right at my ear, and it seems like it really helps with those situations where the dialogue is buried, particularly in some action movie scene with explosions and everything going off. It helps me understand and follow the flow of movies. So they're actually changing my behavior. I'm as likely to be watching a big film on my couch, watching it on an iPad or an iPhone, as I am going to the living room for the big TV there. That's been an interesting change for me. Alex?
And this is the problem: is that we're all subtly changing our behaviors related to the various issues. And, you know, as someone who works in the theater industry, this is a huge problem. Is that, we're now able to buy 85-inch screen TVs for less than $1,000. We can have our own popcorn. We can have our own, we don't have to, we can turn the captions on. We can listen to our headphones. And it becomes, it is really, the current structure will not stand. The current way that it's done will not survive another 2 or 3 years. And so the question is what happens next? And so a lot of us are thinking about that pretty hard, but but there's something has to happen next, because what we're doing right now is not going to continue. The theatrical releases as we know it are in grave danger of not making it sense. I mean, they're trying to figure it out, but no one knows which way is up right now.
Alexander?
I am sure that post houses check their mixes for proper fold down into stereo and even mono, but I'm convinced with some streaming services, and I've seen this even as a problem on Apple TV Plus shows, where there are problems with the fold down to stereo, and I haven't been able.
And just to be clear, typically these are delivered as a stereo track. So if it identifies your system as a stereo track, that's a separate fold down that was already created. It's not folding your 5.1 down in real time at your TV. Their Atmos may do that. So if it's an Atmos processor, it may fold that down for you. But a lot of times we'll deliver a file, but we have a stereo set of tracks that are being delivered separately, and I build the test systems for those, and we have stereo. So that's part of the manifest. There's a stereo mix down that happens. So where you get into trouble is an underperforming 5.1 system or an underperforming surround system that doesn't have a lot of oomph in the center channel typically. And so it identifies as a surround system, but it doesn't deliver the amount of power that's required in the center track to separate the dialogue. But for the most part, this is not a problem. I mean, I know people talk about it. Filmmakers talk about it being a problem with the home systems. It's not. It's a problem with the mix. It is and it is not a home system that is broken. When we go to the theaters, we can't understand it either. So there is a mix. You can keep on talking about the technology, but they've mixed dialogue into the background. And when you mix the dialogue, when you mix it into there, people aren't understanding it, and they're finding other ways to solve that problem. And so it really is. I mean, it's very little. When people complain about it at home, they go to the theater and they complain about it in the theater too. It's not both of them broken. It's the fact that the mix has changed and it's not working.
Courtney, do you have a?
Well, one thing I might say is Alex is right that the streaming box will look at the manifest and request the proper stream for what it can decode. The problem happens is when you plug that streaming box into a TV that's not very smart. And you have the settings on the TV set wrong for what the TV streaming box is trying to deliver, and that's where your fold down problems happen.
I'll just argue that it's an edge case. I mean, the problem is I have a great system. I have a really well defined system, and I still have problems with it. And it's not it's not like when I have 7 discrete or 8 discrete speakers that are delivering content, and I have control over each one of those speakers, and the dialogue is still complex, and so I don't think it's the fold down.
Alexander, you had a last thought before we move on?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I did a test with this. So I have an Apple TV box, but I have a 2-channel analog hi-fi setup. So I have audio coming out. There's digitally, so the Apple TV is connected directly to my TV via HDMI, and then I'm using a Toslink optical cable, and the audio is set to PCM to come out of that optical port, which goes into a DAC, and then I convert down to analog. But what's interesting is when I actually watch a show that's mixed in surround on Apple TV Plus, for example, and I can see that it's showing up that it is. If I go into the Apple TV audio settings and force stereo, the mix sounds different when it's forced into stereo. So I feel like the conversion there's somewhere where in the conversion where it's not doing something right, because it does sound different if I force it to stereo as opposed to just letting the DAC trying to convert it down to stereo.
A lot of complexity in this system. There's a lot of different formats, a lot of different processing going on. Hopefully, for you, Marielle, you can figure out how to get a good, positive experience and reproduce it all the time. Hopefully this helped. Let's move on to the next question.
We have another QR code question from Ignacio Perez in Chicago, Illinois. What kind of software or hardware would I need to live event where they want closed captions on the video wall, but translated from Spanish to English? Any recommendations on software that does this that would provide a key and fill out to our ATEM?
Alex, do you know of any?
Yeah, it's not usually software; it's usually hardware. So the company that kind of has this AI Media and it had bought or merged with EEG, and EEG is the world leader in hardware development. AI Media is the leader in software development of captioning software and hardware. Typically, what we would do in a live event, whether there's, and what you're saying is closed captions. Now, there's a difference. There's open captions, and when you're talking about keying something into an ATEM, you're really talking about open captions because you're gonna burn it into the system. So when you burn it into the video and leave it open, that's open captions. So if you're forcing it to be on, closed captions are metadata that is usually put into line 21, the VANC data, that is going to carry along with the signal. And then when you have a device that is able to identify closed captions, it opens it at the will of the viewer. So you got to decide what you're actually trying to do there. So, but if you typically, we would not, for most of the projects that I work on, we're not trying to key that into the system. What we are doing is we are pushing it into what's called an EEG 492. So basically, this is part of what's called ICAP, is what the transport system does. So basically, the video comes in with audio. Through ICAP, it sends it to either an automated system or a person, and that person is then going to be typing away at their in their captions. And then that data comes back into the EEG. The EEG puts it into line 21, into the VANC data, and it goes out. And most of your platforms, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or just if you send it out to broadcast TV, all of those things know how to deal with that data that came out. And even if it's local, your local television, if it gets it, and if it's being carried to that television, you can turn on captions and you'll see it there. So those are, and we have special like SDI monitors that are, we look for, does this recognize captions, so that we can open it up and see if we're getting captions the way that we expect them to. And that all happens, the latency there is really just the person listening to it and typing it in, or the machine listening to it and making that adjustment. Now, if you do it in another language, you've got a couple different challenges. So if the event is in English, you said you want to translate it from Spanish to English. You can't have typically the same captioner. So you're either going to move to an automated system, or you're going to use an interpreter who's then speaking to a captioner. The captioner cannot do both things at the same time. You think that they should be able to, but they can't. Like they can simply. It's kind of like circular breathing. They have to be able to hear the words and type the words. They can't start hearing the words, trying to translate the words, and then typing the words. So if you're going from English to Spanish, or from Spanish to English, what you're going to have is you're going to have a Spanish to English interpreter hearing the audio. They're going to speak into the system. And oftentimes we'll connect them separately through something like Zoom or other things like that. They'll send it out. We'll still have ICAP, but we won't be sending the audio. We'll still have ICAP connecting to the captioner or the captionist, and the stenographer will then listen to the person and put it in English, but they're just hearing it in English and they're putting it in. So that's an added cost and pipeline and so on and so forth. Nowadays, a lot of what EEG and AI media do are automated systems, which is that you could push that out and it'll come back. You can push it out in Spanish, it'll come back in English, and they're using their own AI to make those changes. I would say that the captioner, there's two things. One is captioners tend to be a little bit more accurate, although that gap is closing very quickly. The second thing is, if it's more technical, they're going to be more able to, the captioners, when given some guidance and watching when given guidance and watching the rehearsals, will do a better job. Although now what we can do with a lot of the AI stuff is to hand it a library. These are a library of targets. Like, these are words that you may see, and having that library, it can actually make that work. So those are some of the things. That's the professional way that most of us do these for large events, is to mix those together. Of course, if you're streaming with AI media, you can stream it through their servers. They'll do the insertion, and then they'll deliver it with closed captioning to a service. So you can RTMP to them, they'll RTMP back out. There's a lot of different ways to make that happen, and that's probably we've done second hours on that, but that's how a lot of us end up handling those issues. Spanish and English are typically the easiest ones because they're required by law in the United States. So there's a lot of captioning infrastructure in the United States to support those languages. Some of the languages that are extremely hard to caption are things like Hindi, Mandarin. Those are very difficult because their alphabets don't lend themselves to a stenographer. So what's happening there is a lot more AI is being used because the AI can do it in a way that a stenographer couldn't. So we're seeing more and more of this. You'll probably see AI take over most of the captioning in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think it's time to settle into the next question.
QR code question from Kirk Holler in Acton, Massachusetts, looking for recommendations for HDR-enabled webcams, as both the entry and prosumer price points. PTZ cameras would also be an option.
Jeffrey, do you want to handle this QR code question?
Yeah, so HDR, I wouldn't focus as much on HDR because a lot of, this camera does HDR and this camera does HDR, but when it comes at the end of the day, it's all about the sensor that you have inside and the lens that you have inside. So if you want to have the best bang for the buck for something like a Zoom or a Teams call or a live stream recording or anything like that, I would ditch the USB cameras, not even look at them at all. Look at something like a Sony Alpha, look at the Canon EOS line. They do pretty good. You can also use your iPhone. There are some great use cases on that, but if you do use your iPhone, I would use a dedicated iPhone that doesn't have calling ability and then put it to sleep so nobody does message you or call you while you're doing a video.
Alex.
Yeah, I agree with Jeffrey that most webcams call HDR is really tone mapping. So it's basically taking a larger spectrum, it's taking a larger dynamic range and compressing it into a smaller one so that you get better highlights and better foregrounds. So what you need to be looking for is something that can truly put out a 10-bit log, output, or a 10-bit HDR10, some kind of PQ curve output from the camera. And you really, in many ways, want to have a LUT that you can control that will let you do that, because then you can drive it towards HLG or HDR10 or other things that you may want to have to, if you're delivering that out to, let's say, a streaming platform that would handle HDR. So those are the things you want to think about there. I think that the Canon CR series, and the only one that I'm really familiar with is the N500. That's going to be a PTZ that does allow you to do those things, and it's a little expensive. It's $5,000. So if you're looking for a PTZ that can do it, that'd be where you'd start to think about other things. Like I'm using an FX30. The FX30 is about $1,700 or $1,800, and it's capable of it. I'm not using it right now that way, but it's capable of that. Of putting out the Rec 2020 that you would need for that process. I don't know of a lot of ones that are under that new. Of course, you can buy some used products. A lot of the Sonys, I don't know if they really put out a true 10-bit out of the HDMI, the older Sonys. The newer ones all do. So I think that the FX30 is a good one. There's the EV10, or the EVZ10. It's like $800. And I can't keep track of all the letters. But my wife uses that one. The problem really with it is it doesn't have a LUT. So there's no LUT there. I do believe it's putting out a 10-bit image, but I'm not 100% sure. Of course, a lot of the Blackmagic cameras are capable of an HDR output as well. So if you're looking at, I think nearly all the new Blackmagic cameras are capable of both LUTs, as well as for a webcam, if you're using it for your home webcam. The challenge with the Blackmagic cameras is really the autofocus. Being able to have autofocus in a webcam turns out to be really important. So that is a challenge for the Blackmagic cameras, but they all have great sensors and they all are capable of putting that out. Of course, the creme de la creme would be the FR7, which I have used as a webcam, and I would highly recommend if you can afford it. I can't afford it, but I would highly recommend using one if you can. The FR7 is a great looking camera and capable of doing all the things you need it to do. There's your PTZ, is a full frame sensor, but I think that in a more conservative area, I would look at the Canon CRN500. If you're looking for a PTZ, I think it's a 1-inch chip, and then after that, look at the FX30 is another great option. FX3s are even better options, but then you also have some of the Blackmagic cameras. So those are some of the things to think about there. But I would definitely look at some kind of camera that you just have to look for a 10-bit output from the camera, and then you're going to figure out how you're going to digitize that from there.
I just had the experience of shooting. Jason and I shot most of our NAB coverage in 38, 40, 2160 HDR on our iPhones and gimbals. And you come back and you see this absolutely glorious looking footage, and it's just a pleasure to edit because the system automatically is doing all of its mapping and it looks brilliant on the monitor. Then you go to output it to something and you're unfortunately having to dumb it down to 1920 1080 SDR, and it just loses some of that beautiful gloss. That's true.
You can post it to, YouTube will do that work for you if you just post it up as HDR. The funny thing is that there's occasionally on my phone, you'll see it on YouTube occasionally, and I see it on TikTok every once in a while, where someone shot it on their iPhone and they cut it and they left it in HDR. And it's funny because on TikTok, it'll just slowly get brighter in the first 5 seconds, and then it's super bright, and you're like, wow, this looks really good. And the next video comes out as SDR, and it just looks like mud, and then like the next 10 are like mud. And then your eye slowly gets back to the mud that it's been living in, and it looks normal again, and then another HDR pops up, and it looks so much better. So
that's the challenge. You get so excited when you see your footage, and you go, "Oh my gosh, this is glorious! Yeah. This looks like cinematography," and then it doesn't hold up through the whole process. Couple of quick little notes here. Where are they? I've got so involved in this subject that I forgot about it. Mimo Composer getting started with Achim Breidenbach happens right half an hour after an hour. I think after we get done with this, 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So that's coming up right after. And as you know, the rest of the show is going to be Q&A. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. It's great to have you here. We are doing an hour of questions and your answers and questions. So let's dive right into our next one.
Next question's from me. What are watt hours with respect to battery specifications?
Courtney's going to start us off on this basic electrical math.
What are you talking about? Watts? Watts is volts times amps. So that's your simple calculation there. So to figure out the watts of a battery, take the amps that it can deliver and multiply it times the volts. If it's a 12-volt battery that can deliver 2 amps, it's delivered 24 watts. So usually it's amp hours as shown on a battery. Usually they show them in amp hours, not watt hours. So that's kind of confusing, although they could be used interchangeably. Is the length of time that battery can deliver that level of current, that number of amps. So if you have a 5 amp hour battery, it can deliver, and your device only consumes 2 amps. That's all it's going to draw. It's, you divide 5 by 2 and multiply it times that length of time, and that'll tell you how long it's going to run your device at that. So usually the list is amp hours, which is the number of amps it can deliver per hour.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, and a lot of consumer stuff is into milliamp hours. So if you're looking for like a plane, getting something on a plane, which has got to be under 100 watts, you need about something with 25,000 milliamps. It's usually about 3.7 volts. Once again, for consumer batteries, when you get into pro-grade batteries, those numbers could change.
Hopefully. Oh, Alex, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, and just to make sure, because the amps are a little confusing because a lot of the things are listed as watts. So if you look at a product that says it's a 6 watt, draw or whatever, or 8 watt draw, you have to add all those up to whatever that battery is supplying. And so you say, okay, well, if I've got a 99 watt hour battery, it means that I got up to if I give it 99 watts that I want to pull, I've got an hour to work with it. If I give it 50 watts, I've got 2 hours with that battery nominally, and so those are the calculations that you have to start to make. So you have to measure the draw on each one of these or look at what their published draw is. But the thing that I usually do is plug them all in and see how long it lasts. So it's, like I use, because, and not only plug them all in and see how long it lasts, but use them the way they would use them. So walk around and get a sense of how long it's going to last to do that. There are big ones now. There's 212s, there's 250s. You can stack these up into, I think the largest one I've seen is over 300. And those are big, heavy batteries. And so that affects that affects a lot of other things that you're doing there. But I tend to standardize around 99s because I can fly with them. So I don't want to buy anything I can't fly with. And so it turns out I can fly with lots of them. I just can't fly with one that's bigger than that. So that's, the reason I use 99s. And so then we figure out how long we have with those 99s to actually make that work.
And remember your usage. If you've got a camcorder that's powered off a battery and you're zooming constantly as opposing to just running it, and it's going to draw much faster. And
a lot of the good news is that a lot of the things that we use very few watts. Like a lot of these things are 6 watt draws or 8 watt draws. But as you start to add them up, the other thing you have to look at for the battery is what can it take as a total draw. Like one of the reasons we had in the shoulder mounted kit that we had 2 batteries on the same kit because one battery can't deliver the amperage that was required. Even though it had the connectors to do it, it couldn't deliver that much at one time. So we had to have a second battery to offload some of the draw.
Alexander, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, if I'm going to rent a 5,000 watt generator, how much is that enough to run all of the speakers that I'm going to be using? So I just find that, and I want to make sure I'm doing this right, but usually what I do is I look at the manufacturer specifications on that speaker. I'll look at max current consumption from the wall, which is usually listed in amps. I'll convert that to watts and then add all of that up. Am I doing that right?
Yeah,
as long as you have an efficiency factor.
We're getting past watt hours, because watt hours is really a battery measurement. Watts is a gasoline measurement, or a solar measurement or whatever. Like if you're taking the hours out, it means that you can keep on putting fuel into it to make it keep going. So if you're talking about a generator, then it's a calculation of how many watts that generator. Yeah, absolutely, that can do. And you can get away with. The other thing you have to pay attention with generators is what kind of signal is it generating? Is it generating a pure sine signal or a square signal, or because a square signal will destroy everything. It'll work for machinery, it just will not work for electronics, and so you have to be.
Speakers do not like square waves.
Well, nothing electronic like square waves. So it's like, what are we doing here? And we've literally had our Liebert, UPS is smoking, because someone accidentally delivered a square wave to it. So you have to be very careful of what that looks like, but you're looking, so there's more than just the power. There's also the quality of the signal, you want to pay attention to as well. Because you can get things cheap at Home Depot or whatever. You can buy, that's a cheap little whatever. You should not plug that into your electronics. So you really you'll end up paying more so you get a clean signal.
Jeffrey?
And whatever you come up with a number, double that. And it doesn't hurt to always have a backup if you can afford bringing a backup with you.
Courtney?
Another thing to consider is if you've got these new transformers that are multi-voltage input. So 110 volts or 240, 30 volts, they're switching power supplies. Bear in mind that, remember, watts, if you're looking at watts is volts times amps. So if you have something that draws, 1 amp, you got to divide it by the voltage. So if you're looking at the amperage output, make sure that, the wattage output, make sure that you're dividing it by the voltage to get the amps, because it's going to be different, because 240 volts at 1,000 watts output, 240 volts will deliver less amps than 110 volts at the same watt.
And this is really important in the field, because you're going to get a set of equipment and you want to plug it into a standard household circuit that has 20 amps. It's real easy to blow those, particularly if you're doing things like tungsten lighting or something from the old days. We'd pop lights all the time. And if you don't know these basic math systems, you can get over draw and pop breakers too easily. So something to be concerned about. Next question.
Next question comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle. Digging the studio use for the official NAB Live. Anything that we're missing? And there's a YouTube link there.
Alex?
We took a different route. I think that the problem really is how compelling is the content? What is the, so we have to kind of look at, I think we looked at the viewership that NAB Live was getting, the viewership we were getting, and we were competitive. So in both average view time as well as total viewers. I think that the problem really is you can throw a lot of hardware at it, but it comes down to what does the content look like. So this was a great. I think it's a great setup. I didn't see any of I saw like passing views of the NAB Live stuff. So I think that's it's a different platform and a different view of what that looks like. If we had enough space, we would probably expand into that space, And so, but I think that where we're going with our coverage may be more, potentially is more compelling than a kind of traditional TV. I will admit that the bidirectional connection to the floor. It's going to be harder and harder for me to watch anything else. Like it's as we go forward, I was so compelled by what I saw there. I was already tired of myself doing something different when I did it. So I was like, oh no, like I've already gone down this. I've already had too much Kool-Aid. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
Courtney.
Yeah, if you take a look at that video and their setup that they have, it's like a regular a mid-sized television studio, broadcast studio. So they had a big wall of equipment. Our equipment was spread out all over the world, kind of, plus what we had in the booths, and the operators were all over. You'll notice in this situation they've got a whole lot of laptops feeding into that system, and they have a lot of hardware. And remember, this is NAB, so a lot of these manufacturers donate their equipment to be used in that booth, as we had a few people donate things for our booth as well. But it's kind of a showcase for hardware, so people at NAB want to donate and have their equipment used in that particular setup, even though they may only be using like 1/10 of the hardware that's in that rack to do that little 2-person interview that's on stage.
There's a lot. I learned a lot by watching it, but there was one thing that bothered me, but I'll mention in a moment after Alex weighs in on this.
Yeah, between Vislink and Sony and Electrosonic and LiveView, I mean, I think we had probably $200,000 equipment on the ground. It just didn't take up as much space, and that doesn't count the incredible infrastructure that we have at John Wallace's location, and the comms that are provided. Like there's just so many things that are that are out there that we're using, that's distributed, that we're able to make happen. And so I think that it's, again, I don't know. I mean, I look at our system. I'm not really comparing it to other people's systems at this point of what are we missing. I'm just looking at our system because I believe we're in a different world than what traditional coverage looks like at this point. So I think that we're not really comparing ourselves to other people, just looking at what we want to do next.
Courtney?
And I made a mistake. Those are not laptops. If you look carefully at them, those are the pop-out monitors and keyboards that are in each one of those racks that control a lot of the stuff that's in each one of those racks. That's what those things are across the bottom of the frame.
Interesting. I thought that was really a fascinating. I only was able to watch a couple of minutes of it beforehand. I thought it was a really fascinating video. I learned a lot. I saw a lot. It's a beautiful system, well constructed. The only thing that really bothered me were all the transitions. I don't know why we're still back in that era where we're going to push left, we're going to flip, we're going to between every scene. It was another weird little edit effect, and I'm kind of past that in my head. So that pulled me out of the video. But that's just an aesthetic thing. Everybody's different.
I think that what I'm always looking for, and we're imperfectly going down this path, is how do we have authentic connection between the folks that are watching and the folks that are on the ground. And I think that I found that sitting in a lot of the round tables and stuff like that in the past for some of this coverage, whether it's the NAB show and other things like that, I really found that I just didn't. I wasn't. I was bored sitting there talking, And so I think that the idea of these, like the problem that I have is that a lot of the stuff is all built around people, like 5 people sitting around talking. We do that every day here. So I look at it like, why would I watch someone sitting around a table in NAB doing this when I could be watching them on Zoom, where I actually think that the audio and the video are better. The audio at most of these things was substandard most of the time. Like if I went to a round table at any of these things, the level of quality of the audio was so bad it was almost unlistenable. And so I think that that's the challenge that the traditional hybrid system always has, is managing all of these things where you're serving too many different groups at the same time.
Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California, and here on the crew. Did anyone see immersive camera crews on site at NAB? I saw a couple in the press room, but didn't have time to chat as we were on air at the time.
Alex, did you notice that?
We didn't. We saw a couple people walking around with a new Insta360 8K, but I didn't see any footage that they were shooting. I just saw them doing it. They seemed very excited about the camera. So that's all I saw from there. But I haven't seen any, and I intended to, but our booth coverage became so intense, and the use of there were a lot of people using Makana and other places, and so between all of that support, we didn't have time to do anything other than execute.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada, and from the QR code. Mic XLR to mixer or mic XLR to Neutrik twist to mixer? What's the difference?
Alexander?
I'm not entirely sure or clear on the question, Chester. Are you asking about differences between different types of Neutrik connectors. I know they do make a right-angled connector that you can actually rotate to make it fit into really tight spots. So if that's what you're asking, that is a good solution if you're trying to get into a tight spot. But other than that, I'm not entirely clear. Maybe Courtney has an answer here.
Courtney?
Yeah, that's what I thought originally. Then I looked up this nitric twist, and what it seems to be is a bayonet type connector, a multi-pin bayonet. Maybe that's just a single.
That's not a.
That's just a
twist.
regular BNC. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's just a BNC. That's what we use for all of our SDI.
But that's what they call nitric twist. Yeah, so it's a regular BNC.
Yeah, that's what. And by the way, it's the best BNC.
Chester, we're having a little trouble making sure that we answer your question. We'd like to. So if you have any additions or want to put it back in another day with a slightly different phrasing, maybe we can get to what you're looking for. But for right now, next question.
All right, here, I need some help. This one's for me. What are the panel's thoughts on people reaching out to you as a subcontractor where they mark up the rates you quote?
Alex?
I expect them to. you don't have a business if you sell everything as a straight pass through. There is a cost to them hiring you. So when they hire you as a contractor, they have costs. They have costs of they have to pay you. Someone has to manage that. There's an overhead that is required. So I would expect someone to, at minimum, mark up my rate by 22 to 25%. So that's a bare minimum of what I would expect someone to mark me up. And if they didn't, I don't think that they'd be doing good business. Because you have to. There's an overhead architectural cost that they have involved that is there. So I expect them to if I'm doing a freelance job or when I've done freelance jobs, I expect them to mark me up. So yeah, I don't have any problem with it.
Courtney?
Question is, Alex, do you lower your rate by 25% to that person who's going to mark it up? Because if your rates are visible publicly, in other words, if you have a website where you post your rates, the client can go and look at, we're getting that, this guy, and here's what I could be paying him directly and saving that 25%. So a lot of times, if you're working as a subcontractor, the contractor will ask for a discount so that he can be competitive with your rates without you stealing them from.
I've never published my rates. And I would never do that on a website. I would never put my rates on a website. It's so that because again, that's not a world I've really lived in that much. So usually it's been, when I've been a freelancer, I think the last time I was paid per hour was before 2000. So I don't know when, I don't know what that looks like. I bid projects out. So someone tells me this is what we want to do. And I go, well, this is how much that's going to cost. And then they can figure out how they jam that up. And admittedly, I've again worked at a company where I'm in more of a producer role than a execution role for 25 years. So I don't really do hourly that much. So I don't. In fact, again, I haven't been paid hourly for 25 years. So I don't
support exactly the same thing. I used to do line item quotes and stuff like that. I try never to do them again. I want to give you a quote. Here's the number. It's what it takes for you to pay me to execute this project. That's it. But, if they want a line item quote, it's usually for the accounting department in the back, and that's exactly when you get into this problem of you have 7 hours in this thing, can you do it for 6? And you don't want to get into those conversations. You want to get to the point where they don't ask you because they know you're going to take care of them.
And again, we do have to supply line items to clients, and that happens. But a lot of times, I think everyone except for accounting knows that it's just kind of like a number that we have to give everybody. I think accounting thinks that it actually matters. The rest of us are just kind of like, yeah, okay, this is the give Caesar what is Caesar's, kind of thing, and then you go and do the project, And so the thing is that, and if someone starts to really dive into our line items after a show, well, that's the last time I'll work for them. If they're going to really, dig into that, we're fair. And when we don't spend the time or money or we get savings, we want to deliver that back to the client because that's going to let them know that we're doing that. But we cut people, I'm just like, okay, well, I got to move on. And they can go find somebody that will do all the little things they want. They just can't do the project. So good luck.
Courtney, you had another thought on this?
Yeah, I find that if you are including personnel, you do have to get into the details of the hours because there are certain state laws that you have to pay your personnel a certain amount of wage for straight time and a certain amount of wage for overtime. And overtime is mandatory in some states. So you have to, if your client says, I want a flat rate, you have to build in the fact that they may run into 5 hours of overtime and you're going to have to pay those employees that overtime, whether it's on your bid or not. So you do have to make allowances for the project. And if you're paying people, the fact that you're going to have to pay them payroll and do the taxes and pay them within 2 weeks, even though you may not get paid by the client for 3 months. So you're going to have to cover all that stuff, and so you have to take all that into account when you're bidding a project if you're covering payroll.
And I agree with Courtney. And again, to go back to the original question, is I get paid what I've decided is fair for this project. Like, I don't care about what they charge for it. Like, I literally don't care how much money they make on the project. I'm not looking down that path. I don't really care what that is. If I've decided that in the supply and demand world of do I have time to do it? I mean, I do things for free because I think that they would be cool. And then I do things that cost money, and I charge for those things because you have to keep paying the bills. But the point is that I charge what I think is fair for that project. Like, maybe I haven't had a lot of work and I need to have, we'll take that job because it's income, and it may pay less than I normally want to get paid. And I don't care because it's better than me hanging out that day. Right. So as a freelancer, I'll make a bunch of decisions about what that looks like. Then once I've made that agreement and they're willing to pay me, what they do with that doesn't mean anything to me. Like it does, like it doesn't, like it's just like you have to be, I don't know. I think that people get too much into trying to figure that all out. And I think it's just a path to insanity.
Business is hard. Let's go to the next question.
We have a QR code question from Chuck Hodges in Tuolumne, California. Announced during NAB, Vantage will now be partnering with Josh.ai. Is this a game changer for these kind of products, or is Legrand just shooting stars? How will this affect all the people who watch the Office Hours show?
Alex?
I don't know. Like I looked at Josh.ai and I just don't. It's seamless smart home integration connected with Vantage. I don't know how these Vantages. I don't know. So I think we'll have to keep on looking at it. But I can't make from that question. I don't think I can make a connection to how that would affect us at all. But maybe it will. Maybe it'll wipe us all out. I don't know what that answer is.
Thank you for putting it on our radar, Chuck.
Yeah,
At least a lot of us will be going, when I see these terms again, I'm going to pay more attention to them and see if this is interesting for me. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Andy Kokendorf in Vieira, Florida. How many Zoom camera direct feeds can Wirecast support within the app?
Alex?
I don't think we know this either. We lost it. We lost Jeffrey there, and we didn't get it in time. And he knows more about Wirecast than we do. So I'm not entirely certain as to what the hard number is for that. For that there, I would say probably at least 6. Most of them have, but I don't have a strong answer for that either.
Let's go to the next question. It's interesting.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia asks, my LG UHD AI, then Q43-inch HDR 10 Pro TV is still in the box, but I wanted to confirm that Alex said in terms of not using the software that was pre-installed on the device, and I wanted to know if I can use the Apple TV or get an Apple TV device.
Yeah, these TVs are getting so complicated. Alex, what do you think?
You shouldn't plug your TV into the internet. Period. Don't do that. It's a dumb screen. Whether you use a Roku or a Chromecast or an Apple TV, whatever you want, the electronics inside of that TV, in addition to the fact that it's tracking everything that you're doing, that's why it's cheap, is because they're selling all your data. In addition to that, the electronics inside the TV are trash, like just trash. And it basically undermines all of us trying to do good work on the internet because we have to figure out how to dumb down our streams to these stupid TVs. So just find a device. The devices will perform better. It'll look better. And you'll have a lot less complexity to it. Just get the TV and start plugging HDMI and don't bother with the Ethernet.
Next question.
Next question is from Paul Wall, who's in Hot Springs. TV on X, the social network, is launching a dedicated TV app soon. Ex-CEO Linda Yaccarino announced that the new app will bring real-time, engaging content to your smart TVs and will support cross-device viewing. Discuss.
What could go wrong? Courtney?
I think this is kind of a political move on Elon's behalf to give voice to people that he thinks are not having a proper voice through social media. Whether it turns into a news channel, for example, or not, it will probably could be fairly polarizing or political. We'll have to wait to see what kind of content they're going to make available over this X channel, TV channel.
Alex?
Obviously, Twitter has mostly spent most of its time outside of the video realm. And so they're trying to figure out a way to get back in. When you bring in the CEO that they have, it's funny when you say ex-CEO, you're like, what happened to her? And then you realize, no, it's ex. Like ex-CEO.
Unintended renaming consequences.
Like, why is she announcing the app if she's not even there anymore? So I think that obviously she came from a Hollywood perspective, and she's going to look at it from a video perspective of how do we, have that kind of influence. And so I think that that's their direction. Whether it'll, as Courtney said, whether it'll work or not, we'll see. I mean, so far it would take a lot of work on their end. The infrastructure on the back end of X or Twitter before that was pretty rough. So being able to put it on TV and have it actually reliably work will be interesting to see if they can pull that off. There's a lot of infrastructural work that would be required, which would cost a lot of money and a lot of people, which X is not invested heavily in the past. So we'll see how that goes.
Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Venetia, California asks, are there any published reports regarding the infection rates of attendees to use as justification of making future office hours coverage more immersive? Most of the physical attendees I interact with have reported illnesses since returning home.
I feel very lucky. I escaped any problems. Alex, did you?
The conference crud. That's what they call it, the conference crud.
Yes.
And so I don't know. It has been a problem. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that CES in 2020 was the super spreader that spread COVID all over the world. So like it was, the timing was perfect for, a whole bunch of Chinese companies come into the United States to show their wares, and suddenly it's everywhere, and so anyway, I always think that conferences are risky, and a lot of us have gotten sick after conferences because you're shaking everybody's hands and everybody's walking around, they're eating and they're doing it's all the worst things that you could have that would spread those things out. I think that there's always an argument that people should be doing more of it. And I think that only people with strong immune systems should go to conferences. So anyway, I do think that there's definitely an uptick. Not everybody gets sick, and I think more people are more careful now than they were in the past. But I still think it's a risky move. There's a lot of germs in a lot of different places. So, and you're not getting much sleep, which lowers your immune deficiencies, and you're drinking and doing all kinds of things you're doing all the things in one place that would reduce your ability to fight off infection, and then so then people get sick. Yeah, but I know a lot of people that are sick this week.
I just think it's office hours. People are generally healthy. I don't know why I'm saying that, because I shook hands with 6 office hours people, and I never got anything. So I consider this a big win this year. So far, that's true. There may be something hiding down deep.
Yes.
I hope not. Let's go on to the next question.
Roz Humphreys in Comox, British Columbia, Canada asks, my green screen is 3 feet behind me, lit evenly with flagged off lights. My Sony a7S III is about 3 feet in front of me. My hair is a bit frizzy. Any way to reduce fringing hair distortion?
You happen to have a serious chroma key player in here, and Courtney and Alex. So Courtney's going to start us off.
Well, I'm not serious about anything. Yes, one way is to backlight yourself with an amber light, or something that is away from the color of the green screen, and of course use a very good keyer like Ultimate, because they have controls in there to eliminate fringing and for fine hair. To do all of those things, you can fine tune it. But a little backlight coming from behind where the green screen is in a color that is different, red or green, in that red or amber, in that spectrum will help eliminate some of the fringing you see around here.
Alex?
Well, there's a couple things you want to look at. A lot of loose hair is going to be complicated for a variety of reasons. One is, are you recording on the A7S or are you having a live output? If you're recording it, it's going to be compressed, and that's going to be problematic for your hair. If you are doing a live output, you're going to have 422 instead of 444, which means it's going to be also half of your color information is gone. Now, for many keen part positions, that doesn't matter, but for frizzy hair, it does. So in a perfect world, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to key that at 4K and then down sample it to 1920 by 1080. That way you'll have the data that you needed to grab all the little bits and pieces of your hair, and then it'll go down into 1080p and go out. That's a little bit more expensive to do that, although it's gotten better because I don't know how much the 4K Ultimate keyer is for, but it's better. It's gotten much less expensive. My version of that, a 1080p 444, not that I'm bitter, was $33,000 when I bought it. And I paid retail. Not that I'm bitter. But I think it's a couple grand now to get the Ultimate. You also want to look at what kind of keyer you're using. Are you using a chroma key? Are you using the keyer inside of the ATEM minis? And the ATEM switchers is pretty good. Then you should get a pretty solid key. The Ultimate's going to be an entirely different level of key. And so even if you're doing a 1080p Ultimate, that's going to look better than any switcher or software that you have there. If you go to the UHD version, you're going to get a higher quality. And I believe that the A7S III is capable of a 4K output from the HDMI, and then you put it into that and convert it, and then go back to 1080 if you needed to. So those would be things to think about there. But if you're recording to it, you're definitely going to see a lot because the compression is going to go crazy.
One little thing I do, Roz, is just make sure that you turn off the green screen and look at the shot without it, and then turn on the green screen, turn off your key lights and everything on the talent, and look at that very carefully and see what your edges look like. I mean, zoom in and look at them and see. Spill suppression is one of the biggest challenges in short depth of throw things. You say you've got 3 feet behind your talent to the green screen. That's less than I would optimally like to have to make sure that the lights hitting the green screen aren't spilling on the shoulders and hair of the person in front of the green screen, which is going to make that more difficult. Alex, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and also just be careful of what your sharpening is set to your. So what sharpening does is it accentuates it makes the dark areas along an edge darker and the light areas along the edge lighter. And so sometimes it creates a white edge or a lighter green edge that goes along the person especially if you have dark hair. And that is impossible to key. So sometimes you need to turn your sharpening down a little bit on your camera. You may need to add that later as a post process, but you need to turn that sharpening down a little bit in the camera to make sure that you're able to pull that key.
Yeah, all good advice. Let's go to the next question.
Eric Hers in Hartford, Connecticut asks, when do you select WebRTC versus SRT for video backhaul?
Alex, what do you think?
Latency. I don't use WebRTC for backhaul ever. The only time I use WebRTC for a connection is for latency. So we're looking for the lowest latency between the person talking and the person they're interacting with. WebRTC is going to perform better than SRT in latency. After that, you definitely want to move to whether it's Zixi or SRT or LRT or whatever else you want to use. You're going to move to that platform as soon as you go over your needs are over 500 milliseconds.
And our next question comes from our friend John Preto. Alex.
John Preto in Las Vegas asks, the year is 2031. Office Hours is covering NAB. We have 2 Tesla Optimus robots in every room of NAB, fully outfitted with AV and radio gear that transmit back to the Office Hours booth, 40 by 40 with live studio and edit bays. Exciting?
Scary. Courtney, what do you think?
John, you need to adjust your meds. It may be sooner than you think. Elon is saying they're going to start delivering those Optimus Primes by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. I don't think he's going to make that schedule. But 2031, will it take that long? And it depends on how much interference those robots throw out as far as to carrying wireless gear around. I wonder what kind of hash those things are throwing.
Alex?
Well, you haven't even calculated the CME. So if you're ever on 2031, the CME will wipe out all of this, and we'll be back to strings, little cups and strings, and like, what are you seeing over there in booth 1134?
Welcome to Corona mass ejection coverage on shortwave radio.
Corona mass ejection. You have like a day and a half of all this coverage, and then nothing.
It's fun, the question, John, and please come back as soon as you can. I know your health is the most important, but we really miss you here. Let's go to the next question.
Next one's from Paul Walhus in Hot Springs. In the first quarter of 2024, 66 short drama apps like Real Short and DramaBox pulled in record revenue of $146 million in global consumer spending. Discuss, and there's a TechCrunch link there.
I didn't have time to read this, but Alex may have an opinion. Alex?
Yeah, I am not familiar with these platforms, so I'm surprised that they were able to generate $146 million. But short drama in general, I think is going to be interesting. I think that it's just a matter of I find that we're more leaning towards shorter and shorter content. Like I prefer, a 1 hour video now. Like I'd much rather watch a series than watch a movie. Like 2.5 hours is a long time in my world to turn to do something. And so even if I'd much rather watch 4 1 hour things back to back, where we have the ability to step away, than 1 4 hour movie or 1 3 hour movie. So I think that these shorter things, I think you'll continue to see grow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if that's an advertising play. The 146 million seems a lot for eyeball attraction, so there's got to be something connected to it in terms of monetization. Courtney, do you know anything about this service?
I don't. Everything old is new again. I just got one word for you, Paul. Quibi. Yeah.
Well, these are seen as the next generation of Quibi. Like Quibi, a lot of
failed spectacularly with a lot of money behind it. So
but the issue with Quibi, in my opinion, I mean, I saw a lot of the content that came out on Quibi, and the problem was it was heavily overproduced. What they thought is if we just apply Hollywood to YouTube, it'll work, and they just didn't get that people don't want to watch that on their phone. Like that, it was a different world, and TikTok proved that people with almost no technical skill can produce better content than Hollywood, or more compelling content than Hollywood. Like when I look at it, when I'm on TikTok,
they're not producing dramatic films. They're producing, reviews, and
it's got more views,
and dances.
So it's people.
Yeah, the weird
watching.
Sentence to me: record revenue of 146 in global consumer spending. That's not ad revenue. They're somehow linking that to product sales somehow, and saying that's what's generating the 146 million.
The issue is that it doesn't matter. Like TikTok is what you make it. Like very little of my stuff is almost all of my TikTok stuff is like informational stuff about things, and it's just because that's what I watch, and then I watch it long enough that it decides that's what you want. And so I think that it really depends on what those things are. They are oftentimes derivative. They are oftentimes clips. They're oftentimes not original, because original narrative content is extremely hard to produce. And the question is whether, but it's also, if you don't do it exceptionally well, no one watches. And so it's a really risky, like narrative production is incredibly risky, because you have to do it at a top 1% or no one watches. And it's really expensive to do that top 1%. And if you get to only the top 2%, spending $100,000 a minute, it's a big waste of money.
I wonder if these shorts are just designed basically to promote consumer products, and that's how they're monetizing it. Courtney, you had more thoughts?
Maybe they can carve out a niche, like the Hallmark Channel, has a niche for, sappy movies. Sorry, Hallmark Channel. But there's a lot of people who like those soap opera-y type things, and if you could deliver them in a half hour or 30 minutes. I don't know how long these are on this new service. But, people become addicted to a regular soap opera with a continuing story,
I think a generation
addicted to those for years.
I think a generation got addicted to those, but that's not the new. If we look at the next generation, they're not, they're addicted to the algorithm. Like they're not addicted to one thing or another. They're not looking at series in the same way. If we look at the generation my kids come from, there is no series that they're watching. They're watching an algorithm. They're watching the next thing that they get given to them. They're not. It's not a. I think that's a. We watched a lot of those things, but I don't think that. And right now, like we're watching a series, but that series, like my family tends to watch one series at a time. Right now, we're watching Sugar, which is actually really good. If you haven't seen Sugar on Apple TV Plus, so it's always a bummer because they did that weekly thing.
Yeah, that let you have 3 episodes and then make you come back. So what'll happen is here's what's happened generally is we get behind, then we start watching something, and then we get cut off and we have to wait for a week. And within 2 weeks, we forgot that it existed. Like we're off to something else. I've had the same pattern.
It's just like, well, that was the end of that show. We don't usually we don't even carry to 1 week to the next anymore. So and I know that that's their way of trying to maximize the amortization of their expenditure against the viewers and making sure that they stay in the fold until they get the next big thing. But it's a super annoying. Like it makes me just want to just wait for a while and then watch it all at one time. I wish I had gotten into Sugar like 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now and just could have watched the whole first season rather than this now.
I've had exactly that same feeling, and sometimes I never go back to them. Sometimes I go back to them, but then Linda and I can't coordinate our schedules, and we enjoy watching the first 3 together. And now you're in this conundrum. Should I go ahead and watch the rest of the 3 to satisfy my desire to find out what happened to the characters? Or should I hold off to see when our schedules sync so that we can watch the last 3? It's just way too complicated for what is going on. It's my little rant for today. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Alex, could you see large language models being useful in roughing out a run of show or similar document when provided with an overall summary by a client? I've used Claude 3 Opus a lot as a co-writer when writing complex content.
Alex, what do you think?
So the problem really with the script writing so far, and I've experimented a fair bit with this in a couple different platforms, and it's just, we have to remember that ChatGPT is the average of all of us, or they're all these LLMs are the average of all of us, and what you end up with is an average script, and it's not very creative. It's something that you could do for a Saturday morning cartoon. It's something that you could do probably on a smaller platform as something that was kind of filler, but you're going to need a human spark, in my opinion, right now to get something that is like, oh, that's compelling, that kind of thing. I do find it interesting to ask it to do things like, how would a doctor say this, or how would a military person say this part, or and it will give you, like, I can give it text and it'll give it back to me in the sense of how it would define those things. So using it for specific areas of dialogue, I think makes more sense. Using it to try to come up with the story. I've brainstormed with it and had it think about things like, oh, yeah, that's really good. But then I would have to add a bunch of stuff to it. Like it would create a pipeline that like, oh, I can see but it's very predictable, and I've even given it crazy things like I want a love story. I want I've done one like I want a romantic comedy between 2 snails but directed by Michael Bay. And it ended up with, a very, very by the book romantic comedy with a drag race in the middle, explosions, and then it came back to that. It figured it all out in 15 seconds. And so, but it's not something that I could probably raise money on.
This has been interesting, really interesting for me, because I find myself pushing back against what I call the averaged voice. I spent so many years writing columns, and I had to write them within kind of a format, and I knew kind of how the sentence structure and the paragraph structure is going to work. When I'm on the web now writing, or when I'm writing in social media stuff, I find myself wanting to write more unusually just because I don't want to sound like the average generative AI stuff. I want to find a different way to start, a different point to make in the middle, and a clever way to end that is not average, because then my voice will be a little distinct from the mass of voices that these generative creators are coming up with. It's a weird little thing, but I'm actually thinking about that these days. So we'll see how that evolves over the course of time. What's the next question?
We have another QR code question from Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada. In recent years, there was a film made using extremely high frame rates per second, so much that it was hard to watch.
Courtney, thoughts?
Yeah, that was Ang Lee's Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, and I did see it at 120 frames per second, stereo 3D 4K projection at the ArcLight Theater in Hollywood. It only aired, I think it only screened 2 or 3 screenings of it in that resolution, in that particular format. And it was bizarre because it's a film, it's a war film about the Iraq War, and it cuts back and forth between this award ceremony and the war. And it's kind of like, it was a very strange experience in 3D, 4K, 120 frames per second. It doesn't look like a movie. It looks like you're watching a live stage play that cuts to different locations through binoculars that are controlled by somebody else. So your point of view, if you were in a stage play and you had, zoom binoculars and could watch different people, because it feels too real. And you see they had a lot of problems. They could not use makeup on the actors because you see it. They had to be very careful. The suspension of disbelief is very difficult. So it looks, especially the war footage, you have to get that very realistic looking, and then it becomes it has a lot more emotional impact, but that's not necessarily a good thing in this situation.
Alex?
Yeah, I've definitely landed on that. I think film should stay at 24 frames a second, and live should go as many frames as it can. so the because I think that realism, what Courtney was talking about was really this. I think that's what makes live really compelling. At 120 frames per second, live is very compelling because it just feels like you're there. It feels like exactly what Courtney was saying. And if we don't move the camera very much, you just really feel like you're there. So if we have a single camera that isn't moving and you're in the right place, it just feels like you're sitting there watching this thing happen, which is a very compelling experience in my opinion. But I think film stays at 24 because, we want to suspend that disbelief. We want to create that cinematic, theatrical feel to it. And it allows you to move the cameras around. For instance, if you move the camera at 120 frames per second, a lot of people get sick, and Gemini Man had that problem where they did the same thing where they did 120 frames per second. And so I think that is you can keep on doing all the old fashioned film stuff. And I think that all works. And I think that it's good for telling the story, narratively. When you go to live, the mistake we see is that people doing narrative want to go to higher frame rate, which I don't think it works. People who do live, film people who do live want to do 2398, which I don't think works either. It creates a very passive experience by the viewer. You don't feel like you're really there. Whereas you start to increase that frame rate, you start to feel more and more visceral. And what we find is that people really feel like they're there, and they feel more likely to move and do those things because they really feel like they're in the experience. And so I think that those are just two different content formats, and we just want to think about where they make the most sense.
Next question.
Paul Walhus in Hot Springs asks, is Flipboard your primary tech news source? There's a TechCrunch article there.
Alex?
I use it a lot. Apple News is probably my number one news source just because it's on my phone and it's connected to a lot of different newspapers and everything else. And so I probably watch that the most. And Flipboard would be my second.
Courtney?
I used to like Flipboard a lot. I have it on my phone. It's gotten so junked up with ads, though. It's almost unusable these days. It's like, you flip through and it's like, oh, no, that's an ad. Flip. Oh, no, that's another ad. Oh, flip. Oh, that's another ad. And click through, and then, it's going to show me an ad before it, So I've been going to Google News on my phone in a Google News app, and that seems to work pretty well. My main criticism of Google News is it chooses from a variety of sources, and a lot of times Washington Post and New York Times, a lot of those are behind paywalls. So you see the first 3 sentences of the article it takes you to, and then you have to subscribe to those to read on. And that drives me nuts. I wish there were a setting on Google News to say, don't show me any links to anything's behind a paywall.
Alex?
No, I agree that I show you something before I tell you it's behind a paywall drives me crazy. I would love to just fade that out because I'm not going to be interested in doing that. And again, that's why I like Apple News, because it shows me a lot of things that would normally be behind a paywall, and I can see a lot of those things, and so that's one of the reasons I use it. The other one that I use a fair bit is NOAA. That's the News Over Audio. And so what I like about that is I can listen to it. So it's all read, and it's samples from everything from Foreign Affairs to many other publications. And so a lot of times I'm out working on my pool or doing something else. And for $8 a month, I can listen. I mean, it's an unlimited amount of audio, and it has definitely impacted how much I listen to audiobooks and podcasts and everything else, because it's relatively new news. I have to admit, I'm a little bit of a international politics wonk, so I mostly listen to Foreign Affairs was charging me a lot of money, and all I wanted was the audio, and they didn't give me audio to all the articles. And then I found out that all the articles that they were giving me were in NOAA, and so I just killed Foreign Affairs, my Foreign Affairs subscription, and went to NOAA, and now I get all the Foreign Affairs stuff that was recorded, as well as all the other magazines that they have.
Alexander, you wanted to get in on this?
Yeah, I do use Apple News a lot, even though it's I fully recognize its shortcomings in the user experience area, which I don't want to get into. But I've actually recently discovered an app. Actually, Leo Laporte mentioned this on one of his podcasts. It's called Omnivore. It's a really cool free service. It's kind of like a read later service for newsletters. If you don't want newsletters junking up your inbox, you can actually redirect them, and there's a browser plugin. So it's really cool. I've got all my newsletters that I'm subscribing to now going into that, and it's a really beautifully designed interface. So I'm really enjoying Omnivore.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Robert Green in Los Angeles. What do you use for transcribing video or audio files for occasional use?
Alex, what's your preference?
Whisper, Mac Whisper is the one, and so sitting on the Whisper AI. There's a Whisper AI that's cross-platform, but Mac Whisper is the one that a lot of us are using for that. And you can throw a couple hours into something, and 15 minutes later you'll have and it's pretty darn accurate.
Yeah, I'm still using Simon Says, but I use it inside of Final Cut, so that's when I have to transcribe something. It's just built in, and it's easy. So a couple clicks, and a few minutes later I have a transcription that's linked.
And if I need the transcript, that's what I use the Mac Whisper. To Bill's point, I use Simon Says when I'm in an editor, when I'm in Final Cut, and I want to just get the transcripts to go. I want the captions or subtitles to go across it. Then I typically have used Simon Says, which is a great platform.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, has anyone ever used MIDI as a video playback system? I've used Video Sync from non-lethal applications in the past, but this seems to be a bit more versatile.
Alex, you have experience with MIDI?
Yeah, MIDI is a great playback system. I have used it in the past, and as a basic playback system that just does playback and does it well. It's what a lot of us have used, the mixture of QLab and MIDI on the Mac at least. We've used a mixture of QLab and MIDI for that kind of playback. QLab is a little bit of a heavier lift and a little bit more expensive, but it does a lot more things. But if you're really looking at just playback there, MIDI is a really good solution. And then of course it has a couple more tools and more stuff than PlayOutB, but PlayOutB also is the other one that you can use. That's going to be far less expensive, and oftentimes will be enough for what you're doing. And our own Jonas Dottel develops that. So I would also look at PlayOutB.
Courtney?
No, I don't use it because it's Mac only. It's not cross-platform.
Oops.
And so I wrote my own video playback software. I'm pretty happy with that. So that keeps me from experimenting with these others, which may be very good. I'm just not. I built the tools that I need into my own, and I don't give it to anybody else. So mine does what I want, and that makes me happy.
Courtney, for our PC users, though, what's it called? How do people find it if they want to do that?
I said it's not available for sale. So it's called TechnoWeenies Video Playback Toolkit. You can find a video. I toyed with the idea of selling it at one time, and so I made some videos of the use of it. So you search for TechnoWeenies Video Playback Toolkit. You may find it out there, the instructions on how to use it.
There you go. You heard it here first. You're an insider now. You know the backdoor process to a tool that'll help you fix this. Let's go to our next question.
Yeah, and it looks like our last question today is from Michael Smith in Silverado, California. 4K WebM versus MP4. Keep original WebM or convert? VLC is my player.
The Universal Toolkit. Alex, what do you think?
If it's just for you, you can just leave it in the format that it's there. You always want to keep that format because that's the original compression of it. But I would probably, if you're ever going to share it with somebody else, you're probably going to want to convert it to an MP4 or something else because the WebM is of limited compatibility.
And hats off to the VLC team. That's open source software that takes pretty much everything in and translates it to most things that don't have a tough licensing situation. I think almost everybody who's been in the video business for a long time has a copy of VLC somewhere on their system, because it is really a great general purpose tool and a robust community that keep, as they come out with new codecs and formats and things like that, they always seem to keep relatively up to date on things. So big plus for that. Plus, JJ mentioned in the chat Handbrake, which is another tool I always have around, that implementation of a user interface on top of FFmpeg. Those are great tools to have if you need to get back and forth across video formats. That's going to take us to the end of the show. Thank you all for being here. As always, our thank yous are critical. There are three major constituents. First and foremost, those of you who are watching the show, our producers, for adding your questions, the thing that actually drives the content of this show every day. It astonishes, I think, all of us on the panel and everybody in the back end and everybody else, how the depth and breadth and quality of the questions you ask here every day. It's pretty stunning. So thank you to each and every one of you watching, to the panelists who show up to add their expertise every day. This is 4 years plus of people showing up to try to help. And I think that's a really stunning thing that we've managed to accomplish. And we never go without saying thank you to the amazing global back-end crew who assemble every day to do this as a labor of love and a way to say thank you to, I know in my case, it's a way to say thank you to all the people who helped me through my career coming up. If I can turn around and add even a tiny bit of help to somebody, and every panelist I talk to kind of feels the same way. If we can add something back to the many, 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 many people over the course of our careers that have helped us learn this stuff, then we're doing a good thing here. Traversal today, we have traveled 56,000 miles. That's 89,000 kilometers. If you want the real conversion, it's 440 million bananas for scale. After Hours is ongoing. See you tomorrow.
That's good.
Do you feel like we're actually back from NAB mentally, Alex?
We're getting there.
Yeah, I feel the same
I have
way.
to admit, I'm kind of glad that we have a lot of Q&As, just so we can just kind of just dance with it rather than having to deal with second hours this week, after last week. So
I felt the same way. I felt like I could do it, but yesterday I did not want to have to prep for a show. I just had so many things to catch up
people
on.
realize like how much prep there is for every one of those second hours. You're just like,
Yeah, you kind of get used to saying next question in your sleep.
Exactly. All right. See you guys.